Okay, so we are the group from the University of Michigan Library, and we are talking about our web archiving pilot program. We are in the early stages of our program, and one reason is because it took us more than a year and a half to get to this point. One of the things we had to do in that time was articulate why the library should be involved in web archiving. Here you can see some examples of libraries who are doing that work. One of the things that we talked about is, as librarians, we have an ethical obligation for future researchers to preserve this content. We want to be able to collect for future DH projects. And it's really just a continuation of what we have always done, collecting things, building collections based on subjects from particular organizations. So when we investigated archiving the web, we had to pick a tool. We settled on Archive-It, which is a very commonly used, popular tool. It's certainly more robust and more discoverable than any kind of in-house tool we could have tried to build. So as we develop our workflows, we need to think responsibly about collecting web content and social media that's sensitive to the producers of this content. So we're grappling with questions about how is the best way to request permission to crawl, how do we use this discussion to build a relationship with the communities. Our pilot highlights 3 different collections that present unique ethical and format issues: water politics in Michigan, queer digital culture and interactive fiction, and diversity in children's literature. Water politics in Michigan is the project I'm working on, and this is really just a continuation of our print collections. On the side of the slide over here, you can see an email from our governor, Rick Snyder. He had to release his emails relating to the Flint water crisis. He did that in a Windows media server. And then over on this side, you see a poster that the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality had on their website, reassuring the citizens of Flint that it was okay to let their babies take a bath in lead-tainted water. There was a public outcry, and after a few weeks, they took it down. So we believe that libraries have an obligation to be involved in archiving this kind of content. It's really important for a non-governmental entity to be preserving government records. The other part of the Water Politics in Michigan project is going to capture social media content for organizations, community organizations that are interested in water issues. So in these images, this is from the Detroit Water Brigades and Flow for Love of Water. There's a lot of online organization and activism around water issues in Michigan. The Detroit water shutoffs and the Line 5 oil pipeline in Mackinac and the Kalamazoo oil spill, as well as Flint. So whereas with Governor Snyder's emails or Michigan Department of Environmental Quality website, we wouldn't feel like we needed to ask for permission for those. That's an important part of government transparency and the public's right to know. For these community organizations, we are thinking about the best way to go about asking for permission, since these organizations might be concerned about things like surveillance. Okay. Sigrid.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'm Sigrid Anderson Cordell. I'm the librarian for English at the University of Michigan, and my colleague Meredith Kahn and I are working on a collection of queer digital culture and interactive fiction. And so this is in a response to there's a very strong movement right now asking for more inclusion and diversity in games. There's a lot of new work being produced by independent developers, and there's a very robust queer gaming scene that is largely outside of the mainstream industry and that presents unique challenges for us to collect and archive in the library. So what this collection is seeking to capture is ephemeral web content that straddles the line between literary text and gaming. And some of this echoes what Eduardo was talking about this morning with the hypertext fiction. This is an attempt to try to capture that kind of material. We're mostly collecting texts, a lot of them that are using the twine as a tool, which for people who aren't familiar with that, it's a tool that allows you to create interactive text-based narratives that are kind of like choose your own adventures, and it's used quite a bit by a lot of independent gamers and a lot in the queer gaming community. So this collection makes sense for us. We already have a computer and video game archive. We have significant holdings in LGBTQ materials in both our general and special collections, and it intersects with our literary collections as well. So we feel like this is important, and there's a lot of urgency around it, in our view. A lot of this material is freely available. It's being housed on personal websites that don't really have an infrastructure for preservation. And so there's not really a mechanism to preserve them. So here is Ananthropy's page, which is both a sort of meditation on queer gaming, but also hosts a lot of her work. So we're seeing a lot of queer gamers are moving their games onto hosted sites like Itch.io. This is Merritt Copes's page there. These sites are much better for distribution and for making it so that people can monetize their games in some cases, but there's no promise of preservation. So it's not quite enough as far as we can tell, or as we feel. So this particular collection echoes a lot of the ethical concerns that Catherine was talking about. It also has an additional one in that these are creative works. So we're thinking about, what is our responsibility towards these creative works? How do we make sure that we're not getting in the way of the creator's ability to monetize their work? It also has a lot of format challenges, and as we're getting ready to do our initial crawls, we're trying to figure out exactly how we can capture a Twine site that has lots and lots and lots of reaching out, and how we make sure that that all gets crawled. So as I say, a lot of developers, this is the game Dysphoria, which some people, and Anthropy's game, which some people might be familiar with. A lot of developers are monetizing or asking for donations on their sites to support the work that they're doing. And there's a real question of precarity in this area. Alison Harvey has written quite a bit about this fragile economy of Twine game designers, that they're sort of relying on goodwill or small donations to keep going. We want to make sure that we're encouraging this work as a library, that we're not getting in the way of these economies in any kind of way, but we also want to make sure that we're preserving this material for the long term. So one way that we're thinking about it is, and actually here this slide is really just more about ways that Ananthropy has been thinking about, like her work has been used so much in classrooms and by museums, of like different ways of negotiating and navigating that economy. But one way that we're thinking about this is contacting all the developers and using opt-out emails, which Angie's going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. And we're thinking about those opt-out emails not only to ask for permission, but as openings and conversations with developers. Not just about our ability to harvest their material, but also thinking about preservation. And if you don't want us to preserve it, are there other ways that we can support preserving this material? We think it's really important to be making connections with the community. As Jules from Documenting the Now has recently said, if you're not working with the community, it's just surveillance. And we're not interested in surveillance. We want to do this right.
So, hello, my name is Angie Oehrli. I am the Children's Literature Librarian at U of M, and I've been working with Juli McLoone, who is the Children's Literature Curator at U of M. And we've been looking at this part of the project into archiving information about diversity in children's literature. At U of M, we have a special collection of children's literature materials, as well as a circulating collection of children's literature materials. This issue has been important in the children's literature community. Recently, you may have even seen this art graph that has been going around about that. So what is children's literature content for us? It is anything that addresses literature for the pre-kindergarten to 12th grade student. What is diversity in children's literature? For the team so far, it's been information about Kids Lit for underrepresented and underserved populations. At this point, we have focused on sites that address issues of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and/or issues concerning ability or disability. We are struggling at this time to figure out how diversity in religion might be defined authentically and in a representative way. There are many ways to define diversity in children's literature, and you'll find as I speak more that we're reaching out to the children's literature community to help us with those definitions. As we've been considering what to include in the collection, much as Catherine and Sigrid have been discussing with you, Julie and I are trying to figure out exactly how we engage in conversation with content creators. Julie and I are deeply aware of our identities as two white women defining and deciding what diversity in children's literature looks like. And so how can we be in communication with the children's literature community, with the creators of this content that we might include, and still be responsible to future researchers who might explore this content? How practical, though, would it be to ask permission for every content creator using an opt-in approach? It's difficult to find contact info for some of these sites, and if we sent email, you've had this before, right, where somebody sends you and you automatically assume it's spam. We don't want to be in that situation. So we've been recently considering a multi-layered approach that includes both opt-in and opt-out methods. Julie and I have made a decision to employ an opt-out option for sites such as those that are clearly created by diversity-related organizations and book award sites. After reading a variety of sites of this type, such as the We Need Diverse Books organizational site or the American Library Association Stonewall Book Award site, it seems clear to us that this content is intended for broad public consumption. Thus, we are treating ArchiveIt essentially as a tool to make a preservation copy of a published work, which we will provide long-term access to intellectual content when the original is no longer available. Here we have some excerpts from our opt-out letter. We want the letter to be friendly, not too lengthy, and have it, as Sigrid mentioned, possibly considered to be an invitation to talking about issues surrounding preserving online work. In addition, in the work that we're doing to identify possible sites to include in the collection, we've recently had a conversation with last year's president of the Children's Literature Association, and we're thinking about how we can work in conjunction with the Children's Literature Association's Diversity Committee. This committee consists of elected CHLA members who are experts in the field. This approach seems attractive to us since it includes scholars that represent the diverse children's literature community. For other more personal content like social media sites, the team has struggled a bit. So there are social media for organizations, which we feel is like the sites we mentioned before. The content is designed for public consumption, so we might approach it the same way. Although we are still familiarizing ourselves with the ArchiveIt tool, we believe that we can limit the scope of crawls to avoid capturing too much content beyond the feed itself. Making an individual's social media site, like the ones you see here, feed be the starting point of the crawl, it feels a little more uncomfortable for us. Individual social media sites seem so personal. And what about the times that people who go back and delete past messages, but we've already crawled them and put them in our archive? Maybe you read the recent Prof Hacker blog post about this. So the problems of contacting these people and also getting a response may also remain and be exacerbated by the social media. One option might be to reach out to people via their Twitter feeds or other social media feeds with a link to a PDF Google Doc version of our opt-in letter and contact info. So we're considering an opt-in policy for more personal social media cases. So I'm just going to wrap up a little bit to give you an idea of sort of big picture, some of the unanswered questions, some of those overall kind of things we're still struggling with. One is, again, just balancing the ethical obligations that we have as librarians to the content creators and balancing that with the ethical obligations that we have to future researchers. This feels like an evolving process. And then second and last, to paraphrase Burgess Jules again, we need to find a way to move forward with the project without feeling paralyzed by these issues. The team may change what we're doing later on as we talk with communities and try to address those needs. Thank you.